Today, we're going to be drawing one character using 3 different art styles. We're going to learn different styles of anatomy, color, and design, and also explain the concept of art style. This might give you an idea on how I learn and apply techniques for my drawing process. So, grab your pen and digital canvas, and let's learn some art. This video is sponsored by Zenless Zone Zero. You've probably heard of Zenless Zone Zero before. It's a pretty cool game with a bunch of cool character designs. If you haven't heard about it, Zenless Zone Zero is a post-apocalyptic world where modern society has collapsed due to a mysterious supernatural disaster called the Hollows. You, as a player, will step into a role of proxy, teaming up with a diverse cast of characters to battle unknown threats and uncover secrets within New Eridu, which is like the last shelter for urban civilization. Now, here's the good news. Zenless Zone Zero has an upcoming anniversary celebration filled with tons of new stuff. First is the massive rewards for all players. There's gonna be free rewards for all players starting on June 6th, so you just log in and participate with the release of version 2.0 to claim these rewards. You can pre-register now and unlock these. And finally, if you haven't played the game, there are special rewards for new players, so make sure to take advantage of that. The update is going to feature an entirely new map called the Wi-Fi Peninsula, which is a Cantonese-inspired faction. This includes brand new story arcs, locations, and characters that's going to make the game much more interesting. Next one on the list is going to be the main focus of this video, which is the new character, Huion, which for me is the highlight of this update, and would make you change your plans, if you know what I mean. Huion is an S rank, ether attribute, attack type, and range combat character. We'll talk more about this character later. Another good news is Zenless Zone Zero is officially launching on the Xbox console as part of the anniversary celebration. There's also a starter pack available for pre-order. You can wishlist now and play for free starting on June 6th. And that's it, back to the video. First thing I would like to do is do a character study so we can familiarize ourselves when we draw the main illustrations. So this is Huion, a cool white-haired female character with a pretty cool bird. Okay, that was my first impression. But if we look closely, the color palette is predominantly black, gold, white, with some red accents, with some subtle design details that would represent the Cantonese theme. The thing that stands out the most would be the jacket. Or is it a jacket? It just looks so interesting. So it's a crop jacket where she wears it, but not really, because on the sleeve here, there's a hole where the arms are popping out, which is a unique feature and I really love it. I think it's gonna fit well when she's fighting and doing some action. Overall, the design looks pretty sick and I really enjoyed making these sketches, even though I tried to avoid too much details because my goal here is to feel for the major design. And there's just like too many details to draw, which is not bad, but it just takes a lot of time to do. Okay, now we're done with the warm-up. Let's talk about art stylization. When I want to draw something, I always think about the art style scale. So the art style scale is basically a concept that I use to dissect an illustration. For me, it boils down to 2 elements, realism and stylize. And if you're intentional with it, your art can fall anywhere between the scale. Just take note, I made this with my own experience, so it's mostly just subjective and isn't necessarily an absolute concept. Let's start with the realistic art style. A really important part of doing realistic art style is getting references. So these are what I'm going to be using as a reference board. It contains the character reference, and in the middle we have the art style reference made by other artists, and I usually have this as a reference for my brushwork. And lastly, we have our real reference so we can have a basis for the lighting and texture. Realism is of course anything that is close to reality. A great example would be fundamental studies. It could be lighting, anatomy, or color as long as it's based on a real subject. When I say realism, I'm not talking about some ultra-realistic art style that is a one-to-one copy of the real thing. Nope, I'm referring to this type of realism art style that illustrates shadow, human proportions, and some brushwork. So this is the posing that I envision for this piece. It needs to have a bit of dynamic for the pose since it is a fighting game. It needs to be flashy, so I added a bit of perspective. The sketching part might be the longest and the most tedious because everything is going to be based on this process. There's a lot of pressure while working. It has to be perfect or else everything that I do from here is just going to be bad. So here let's create a separation by painting a background. Since we are working with a white hair character, let's use a darker background to make the character stand out more. Since if we just do light, the hair is not going to be visible. Let's now get into the base colors. Instead of color picking, I usually just eyeball it to train my observation. And the color is just straightforward anyway. Now for the lighting. So first get a multiply layer and clip that onto the base colors. Now let's get a key lighting here by erasing some shadows. Here I chose a bluer shadow to add a layer of atmosphere. Also, an important thing is the brush selection. When I'm doing realism, most of the time I would use a traditional textured brush to mimic traditional art. The second part of painting shadows would be the reflected shadows. So here I just added a bounce light on the opposite side of the main light. After that, here comes the boring part, which is detailing and rendering. The clothing were really tricky because you would need all the clothing reference you can get, because it is important to reflect the realism of the texture that the character is wearing, so lots and lots of reference to really get the sense of materials and foldings. In this part, I was actually adding some design details that I forgot because there's just a lot of them. This is like the biggest problem for me when drawing gacha characters. I think they're worth it since they do add to the character really well. At this point of the process, I work on the background, made it darker and added textures. And then added some effects since Huion's power has some yellow aura and I almost forgot the bird. I wanted to showcase her power more, so I added some more effects like her yellow and black aura coming from her hands. Added more details on the face and everything. After painting everything, I got started with the most satisfying part of the painting, which is adding the lighting glow, using a color dodge and overlay. Here I used an airbrush and a white color and slightly added some radiance for the lighting. It is so simple, yet it had so much impact. Next I added some adjustments, and here's the result. Not that realistic, honestly. It feels more like semi-realism, but that's the price of not having a solid subject to work on. But still, I don't think it's that bad since I am really used to drawing more anime. I still lack on the realism part, so I'll have to work on that. Semi-realism is of course the middle style, which is a mixture of both style and realism. This can be characterized with somehow realistic fundamentals, with a lack of bold line art and oversimplified structure. It is more focused on color and shadow to achieve edges, make it more real. Most of the time it has different designs from what you will see on human face structures, and most of the time you would see this design change in the face. And the easiest part to tell whether an illustration is stylized or not. Now on to the sketch face. For this piece we're going to be using some low angle and some interesting pose. This one was a bit annoying to draw because of the angle, so I had to find some faces that looks like the one I'm drawing. But even then I still struggled. After a reasonable amount of time, I managed to settle for something acceptable. Next, I added the base layer and the base colors, and then finally lighting. Before rendering, I merged everything together because it's gonna be much easier to paint over everything instead of going through every layer. I also tried to include a brush texture to keep the realistic aspect going for this piece, but something just feels off with the lighting, so hopefully we can just fix that later. At this point, I thought I was done, so I went to bed. But when I saw this in the morning, I was kind of disappointed and wanted to restart everything. Then I just decided to change the face because I thought the hair and face was terrible and everything else was alright. So I painted over the face and made it more lighter to have more focus on the face. Here I played with the values and made it more muted by playing with the contrast and brightness, which I think made it so much better. And I think we're done. I must say I was pretty satisfied with how this came out. It was really a good choice to remake the whole face because the initial one wasn't really it. It was leaning more into anime and I wanted a more realistic proportions for the face. Moving on. When we talk about stylization, the first thing that would pop in my mind would be Yoneyama Mai. I don't think it's even crazy to say that this is the embodiment of anime art style. I think we can all agree on that. I would even argue that this is the pinnacle of creativity because this artist would create a vibrant abstract piece and make it work with anime. And I don't even like abstract art, yet she's probably one of my favorite artists. She has a YouTube channel, so it was really helpful when studying her art. It gave me enough information that really helps me understand her process. The most noticeable feature in her art style would be the focus on faces as well as exaggerated perspectives. So here I tried to come up with a cool pose with a high angle perspective but it was really difficult, so I decided to cheat and use 3D. I'm still a bit of a beginner when drawing in perspective. It's so complex, so I would mostly just avoid it, but I really had to lock in for this one because I need that perspective to get the art style. After going through that painful experience of figuring out how anatomy works in perspective, I now have to do my least favorite activity in art, which is doing line art. Line art and cel shading is like the bread and butter of anime style. But let's talk about art style in general. Having a stylized art is the best if you want to draw from imagination and create things that don't exist, or create things that is based off from other people's art, like the anime art style. But I highly suggest mastering or at least getting decent at drawing realism because it's very important, trust me. Because once you do learn it, you'll be able to draw mostly whatever you want without relying on references. Stylized art is like breaking the rules. But of course, you need to know the rules before you break it. For me, I would mostly focus on anatomy because it is the foundation of character design, which I mostly do. A good stylized art doesn't mean a total abstract art or something that you can only understand. A good stylized art still hangs on the art fundamental, which is reality. So you can't just use your art style as an excuse to draw horribly, which I do a lot. Next is adding the base color. And then the key lighting. Now, lighting in this piece was really important. Having Yone Yamamai's artwork as a reference was really important in my process. It helps me with my decision making. So the next thing I did was soften some hard edges of the shadow, mostly from the face, because the face would be the focal point. So it's where the details are mostly going to be found. Next, I added some bounce lights. And then work on the eyes. The eyes are also really important for Yone Yamamai's art. It's like where all the budget goes. They're really detailed and shiny. Next is, I noticed how the shadows have the saturated edges. So I went ahead and copied that. To do this, you simply use an overlay layer and use an airbrush on the edges of the shadow. For this, I use a pinkish tone. Next, I darkened the background to highlight the face. Added some glow using color dodge. Now for the interesting part. I use a blur effect for the hands and body to further strengthen the focal point, which is the face. I did this by copying the parts that I want to blur using filter, blur, and then I mostly use either Gaussian blur or motion blur. Here I'm going to be going with motion blur. I would set the strength around 14, but it's definitely up to you. Press OK, and then I would adjust the opacity a bit. To add some effect on this piece, we can add a noise effect, which Yone Yamamai uses in some of her illustrations. First, go to filter, then press render, and then pearly noise. You can set the scale to 3, and then press OK. Set the layer to overlay, and then adjust the opacity however you want. Lastly, I added some more lighting effects, and we're done. This was my favorite out of the 3. It's very simple, yet looks very good, but I really enjoyed making all of it. Let me know which one is your favorite. And that's it. Hopefully this has been very helpful. God bless, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.